Right. We are on with Shiraz. Shiraz is a healthcare executive. He specializes in transforming organizations and building long-term strategies for them, as well as really experienced and big in operational excellence. I met Shiraz through the same company that we're working for right now, TPG. He is a great consultant as well, and really, it's been a pleasure working with him. How are you, Shiraz?
Thanks for the intro. I'm doing well, Reza. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for taking the time to do this. I know you're really busy as well, gearing up for some new projects too. So really appreciate it.
Absolutely, not at all.
So for those who don't know, can you contextualize, what it is that you do and kind of a small intro, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a would classify myself as a change expert, and whatever the nature of that change may be, my role is to figure out how to implement it. And oftentimes, changes are operational, and most often in organizations nowadays that are more mature, they're struggling to get their staff and their culture a bit more adaptive to the operational challenges of today, whether it's cost challenges, whether it's market challenges, whether it's challenges with uh, you know uh, growth. So my role is to find ways and tactics to solve these challenges in a way that engages the broader organization. So that's how I would classify myself broadly. The past 10 years, past 11 years actually, of my 21 years of working in this field has been focused very much on healthcare because I think healthcare is just fascinating. I think the level of complexity that you deal with in healthcare with consumers, patients, providers, physicians, the dynamics between them, government, funding models, incentives is so unbelievably complex that it's one of those industries that are just ripe for improvement, not just from an operational lens, but also from a strategic lens and from a model of care lens. So that's been my passion over the past 11 years, but I have had a lot of work. My exposure to improvement and transformational change actually started with the Bombardier Aerospace in manufacturing. And they were one of the early adapters of Lean Six Sigma in Canada and on a massive scale for a large organization. So that's where I got my start. So spent a good few years there working on transformation at the Toronto site, and then I moved on to energy sectors in the direct energy. But healthcare is my passion, so I've been there. And lately, I've been working with TPG in various sectors as well. So it's been an exciting past few years all around. But I can say that the principles are the same. You need to be able to engage people at a very meaningful lens in a way that makes them want to change. And then you want them to have the tools to change. And then you want to set up a structure within the organization that allows people to coach each other as they try to adopt change. So these principles sit everywhere. So I really enjoy uh, venturing outside of healthcare as well. But lately, I have been very much in healthcare, and that's where my passion lies.
Interesting. Okay, so you mentioned operational improvement, and to me, the question that really arises is what is the difference between operations process improvement versus when you're looking at it from a strategic level and a strategic lens or point of view? Are the tools and frameworks or mechanisms that you would use in one versus the other be different?
Mm. It's a great question. I mean, you would one could argue strategy is a combination of small tactics. Right? So, and in order to make those small tactics work, you need the ability to execute on those tactics. And there, in turn, is what operations does. Operations is essentially the process of executing on tactics broken down by the hour, right? Broken down by the day. So you're working towards the same goal. If I was to be quizzed, or if I was to ask you, I would maybe ask this question: what is more important for an organization if you were to choose one? an awesome strategy or awesome operational execution? What would you pick? I mean, that's a question that I was asked one day. I had to think about it. But if I was to ask that to you, what would you pick?
That is an interesting question. I mean, both are very important in a way. I would say in the long run, it's important to, know which direction you're headed towards, which is where the strategy comes in. But then in order to run efficiently on a day-to-day basis, you do need your operations to be in order. Otherwise, you won't even get to that strategy.
Mm-hmm. Let me put it another way. I'm going to use an airplane example because my exposure to transformation was in aviation. So I can use an example. Would you rather be in an airplane that is operating really well, but not sure where it's headed, or in a plane that you absolutely are sure where it's heading, but it's not really operating well at all?
Definitely in a plane that works and is operating smoothly, for sure.
Right. So, I mean, it was a question that's been raised in many circles, and it's not an easy answer. But I'm I'm strongly of the view that you need to have solid operations as a foundation, because that's what your culture is. Right? Right? Culture is how you solve problems every day. Right? That's how I like to define culture. And if your operational framework, if your daily operations do not allow people to solve problems every day in their realm, your organization is not going to be able to adapt to change.
Hmm.
So strategy can change, right? If you have solid operational foundation and a solid execution framework, then you can actually adopt yourself to a new strategy when things change because you have a really good way of cascading goals. You've got a coaching based culture. You've got clear metrics defining what success looks like. And you've got processes and technologies in place to help you get you there. Right. So if you decide, okay, well, it looks like we're going to change our market, we're going to change our audience, we're going to change our product mix, right? Strategic decisions. You can actually, and again, not to say strategy is easy, strategy is really hard. But when you make that big shift, if you have a strong operational foundation, you can make that shift more effectively.
Very
Right.
true.
Guess what? You've got the foundation for cascading metrics.
Mm.
You've got performance management. You've got people who understand their role in the organization in terms of metrics, in terms of improvement, and you've got technology in place that can, or let's just say data that can be adopted or modified to suit the new strategy. However, you could have the world's best strategy, right? Perfect strategy, but you just can't execute. And at that point, it's just a work of fiction on in a document, right? It's this aspirational. You haven't done anything. So that's why I think the foundation of everything is operations. Um, Obviously, nobody can say either or. You have to be in the right, market and make some really critical decisions on what you're going to do versus not do
Mhm.
um, in order to think about strategy. So I was just posing this as kind of a interesting conversation piece because I know that people often talk about strategy and operations kind of separately. I think obviously they're very closely intertwined, but I think if you were to pick one, and often the part that is not as glamorous as strategy, the day-to-day operations, the cold face, so to speak,
Yeah.
that's where people often need a lot of guidance and support. So when it comes to strategy, I think again back to operational discipline. Strategy is about what you don't do, right? So
About what
as
you
an
don't do.
organization, right? That's what I believe. Everybody wants to do everything, right? If you go to an organization, they want to do everything. They know they can possibly make money or get into loss in the markets. But strategy is about saying what we're not going to do and being very clear about what we're not going to do. And they're in turn being clear about what they are going to try to distinguish themselves in. So that's strategy. So strategy is a bunch of tough decisions you got to make. And obviously, once you make those decisions, you get your engine running around moving in that direction. And it takes a while to unwind, right? So if you make a poor strategic choice, you have to be able to unwind. So if you have good operations, you can change direction that much more easily. And if you look at anything that's happening in the world today, I don't know if most organizations have the capacity to make long-lasting strategic decisions that stick, right? They have to be constantly, agile and responding to the environment as well while they think about their strategy.
Interesting, man. I always appreciate speaking with you because every conversation I'm learning something new. So this question about operations and strategy, I mean, it was a very good example as well to convey what is more important. I mean, sure, they're both important, but at the end of the day, like you said, if you don't have your operations running smoothly and nimble and agile, then no matter how glamorous your strategy is, it's not really reality. It's just daydreaming at that point,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. So I just want to dive or zoom in a little into operations. So I know you've had a lot of experience, you said, in the aviation industry, in healthcare, now with TPG, amongst multiple projects or across multiple projects. What were some common operational challenges, or what are some common operational challenges that you see organizations facing? And we can talk about this in the context of healthcare as well. But I'm curious to know your thoughts. Are there any recurring patterns that you see, or any themes across different industries?
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a very my view is this: there's so many technologies and so many tools that are out there now in terms of just richness of information
Mm-hmm.
that help people make better decisions operationally, right? Things that would have taken you months and months to, data to compile, now you can do in a matter of, minutes. There's so many, tools out there from a simulation perspective, discrete and event simulation, and process automation that are out there that help with operational challenges. Um, so it's tough to say, what's kind of been the most resonant issue. Every industry has their own unique issues. I mean, like in healthcare, consistently, at least in Canada, it's about access, right? Resources aren't growing yet. The population is growing. The demand for complex care needs are growing.
Mm-hmm.
The age demographic is growing. So as people get older, the demand on the system grows, the demand on multiple disciplines grow, the demand on long-term care, on affordable care continues to grow. And that's not too different from other industries. I mean, you keep on, one of the operational challenges that we always talk about is how do we keep on doing more with the same resources, or if not fewer resources. That's been the constant challenge. And then you keep on scraping away at that bone, right?
Mm-hmm.
You always run the risk of moving from lean and mean to skinny and angry, right? How much can you keep on scraping at that and at that same at the same bone to get more and more? To me, I think the most consistent challenge that exists in operations is sustainability of the operational improvements that you bring in. So I've been around long enough in enough industries to know that projects repeat themselves every 4 to 5 years, like larger organizations. So every 4 to 5 years, they're going to, maybe now it's 3 years. They're going to do the same exact project that they did 3 years ago or 4 years ago, and to get the same exact results that either they forgot about or people changed or they were not able to sustain.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, by and large, that's our biggest challenge. We know how to improve things. There's lots of tools and methods that you can bring in place to improve things. We as consultants come in and help provide that guidance. But what's missing and what's difficult is long after we're gone as consultants, or long after the project teams are gone, what is the organization doing to embed these improvements? And that's what we call the management operating system, or just an operating system. And I think that is still an area of of management science that is not quite there yet. I think from a cultural perspective, there's a long way to go in many organizations to sustain improvements in a meaningful way.
So is this intertwined with change management?
It is. I mean, change management is, I mean, part of it is communication, part of it is how do we get people to actually buy in and want to own these changes. And absolutely, you're right. Once people feel like they're the ones who are owning the changes rather than it's being done to them, then they are more adaptive to the changes and they stick. But on top of change management, and I guess you could almost say it's part of change management in a way, but on top of change management, you really need to have a management system. And when I say management system, I actually mean what are the daily habits of people? What do people do every day to think about management and improvement? It's not just something that should be limited to the boardrooms, right? And so for me, I look for what's happening outside the boardroom. Are people spontaneously getting together to solve problems? Do they have a standard way to solve problems that they can easily teach each other? Do
Mm.
they have a standard vernacular or language on which they use to dissect a problem and to come up with a solution? So when people talk about things like lean or Six Sigma, it's not so much about no the brands, but it's really standardization of certain methods and language and tools that are approachable by the front line, so they can make part of it. They can become they can make it part of their routine. And then, are they meeting every day? Are they thinking about improvement every day as part of their job, or are they waiting for a special committee to convene to look at this project, kick off a project, and improve stuff? And I'm not a fan of improvement by committee, right?
Mhm.
You don't get sustainable improvements by doing improvement by committee, and most projects start that way. But certainly, you don't want to have that as the ongoing way to manage your organization. So to me, that is a universal challenge, a universal issue around all industry is how do we embed improvements? And the more employee turnover you have, the less you retain knowledge. The less you retain knowledge, the more you're likely to fall back to your old practices. And or the less ownership you have among employees or among staff or among leadership, the less likely they are to carry on with the changes that executives want to bring aboard.
Yeah, this question always comes into my mind. I always, kind of marinate the idea of top down versus bottom up management operating systems. And it's always a question to me as to which is a more sustainable and impactful way to approach this, because like you said, when a project team leaves or when there's a new generation of the workforce that enters the organization or the consultants leave the project, what is the best way to continue making sure that that machinery is running smoothly? And when I say machinery, I actually mean the system.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
how can it be run smoothly?
You know, there isn't an easy answer to that, right? I think it's a combination of both, and I don't intend to sound wishy-washy on this, but executives have a role to play by providing direction. And then, to me, the most important thing they can do, aside from providing direction, number two, is model behaviors. What, how do they approach problems? How do they exhibit themselves in front of others? And how do they deal with difficult situations? And how do they elicit um, learning from their staff? And how do they encourage their staff to come up with solutions? Right. So that's the coaching part. That's the behaviors part. If you have destructive behaviors or behaviors that are not conducive to improvement and innovative thinking among the executives, and they're not exhibiting those behaviors, if they're not self-aware enough among themselves to exhibit those behaviors, and you can have the best management system, top down, bottom up in the world, you're just not going to have it sustainable, right? Because you're just not having the right kind of conversation. Because it takes a lot for a frontline employee to decide to say, you know what, my job isn't just my job to punch in, punch out. My job is to also improve my job. Right?
Mhm.
I've got two jobs: to do my job and to improve my job. It takes a lot for them to come up with that mindset, and they need a lot of support. They need a lot of encouragement to say, you know what, we're going to support you in that journey. As executives, we have to carve out time for you to improve your job. We've got to give you training. We've got to model behavior so that you know what good looks like,
Mhm.
and then we will hold your middle management to account to make sure that they're exhibiting these behaviors. So as executives, it's a huge responsibility. You're stepping out of the boardroom, you're showing yourself to employees, and you're modeling certain behaviors and using certain language you want them to use. That's really hard, right? And then you're doing it repeatedly, right? You're making it a pattern. So once staff starts seeing your behavior, your pattern of behavior as an executive, then the system starts to work. So then we can talk about bottom up.
Interesting. Yeah, that all of this is on the road or journey to achieving operational excellence, right? That's really what operational excellence is, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and Lean Six Sigma are just tools that you can, like you said, learn in order to integrate into the organization in order to be able to solve problems or identify waste or reduce variation in whatever context that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And it's really, engineers like yourselves and your colleagues, and when they come into organizations as consultants or otherwise, they'll bring a certain level of sophistication in the tools that obviously the average employee is not going to necessarily comprehend. They might appreciate it, but they may not comprehend the nuances of it, and that's fine. That's the role of the consultant. The second part of it is, okay, well, now that this is done, now that the improvement is in place, now the solution is in place, what's my role as an employee? What can I understand about the solution that I can own and implement and continue to maintain? So that's the translation part. That's the part where the solution, the elegant solution that's built, needs to be translated into a set of tactics that any employee can make part of their day. Right? So you come up with a new process, great. Is that process easy to understand?
Mhm.
Is that process simple to update? Is that process accessible? And can a supervisory level person audit that process a month down the road and see, yeah, it still makes sense, and I'll update it. So it's the translation of approachable methods and tools that need to be thought about as well when a solution is implemented, so that people can think about, well, what can we do? What's our role? And I think fundamentally that's the point of lean, right? I mean, it's lean management. It's making improvement accessible to everybody
Mhm.
based upon their knowledge in the organization, based upon where they are in the organization. It's like everybody's job to be able to make change happen.
Right. Otherwise, if it's too complex or totally irrelevant to the specific role that you're looking at, then it won't be sustainable, right?
Yeah. I mean, you tell me the last time you've seen really smart people come in to an organization as external folks, or even internal people, internal consultants, and be super successful in implementing a huge solution, because they came up with the best idea and they came up with the best solution. It's just, I've never seen it. Right? You see tremendous amounts of resistance to it because
Yeah.
everybody's thinking, well, what do these guys know? Right? They're sitting in a room with their pointy hats and coming up with elegant answers to problems that they don't fully understand. The whole point of lean is you're coming up with those solutions still, but you're contextualizing and you're inviting the rest of the organization and staff to come up with their nuanced approach to implementing that solution and sustaining that solution and owning it. So you're giving them the opportunity, again, think about top down, bottom up again. You're giving them the opportunity to making the solution more customized to them in their environment and owning it, and being able to, in their own way, in their own small way, small, medium, large way, make an improvement around it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned sitting in a room with their pointy hats. One thing that came to my mind is like being a corporate philosopher, you know? It's like you come up with all these grand ideas, but somehow those philosophies that you come up with have to translate into the daily life of every employee, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So another thing that I wanted to touch on and get your input on is for young people who are entering the industry, let's say healthcare, right? Um, do you have any recommendations for them in terms of, let's say, if someone were to say, I want to prioritize some of the things that I should be learning or some of the things I should be focusing on, right? So, but
Mhm.
going back to our first point about operations versus strategy, obviously it's more important to focus on excellent operations and then come up with a strategy. So, on a similar note, if someone were to ask you, I want to enter the healthcare industry and what are some of the important elements that I need to focus on? What would you say to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I in healthcare is such a huge beast, right? When I think about strategy in healthcare, you kind of have to think about it one of two ways. Either it's strategy within a healthcare organization, which is much more operationally driven. So every hospital has a strategy. They've got a 5-year or 7-year strategy, and most hospitals have that established based upon either some internal work or some consultant work, and they put some lines in the sand and what they want to be when they grow up, right? At that point, strategy as a strategy formulation is kind of done, right? I mean, you obviously make adoptions, but that's kind of done. Everything else is execution of that strategy.
Hmm.
So the strategy offices of those organizations focus on translating those statements or those goals into deployable tasks or deployable actions, along with measurable indicators of those actions, which you would call a scorecard. And then translating that into projects, tactics, programs that are needed to implement, right? So that's kind of where strategy comes in. And I think that's very deeply embedded with execution, right? Operational execution. Now, within execution in hospitals, I'm talking specifically about hospitals,
Mhm.
and like pharmacy, pharma, so forth. A big part of that is actually pure operational implementation of their departments to work more effectively towards a goal. So if you're talking about a hospital, you're going to say, I want to be able to improve our patient throughput by 30%. We know we want to reduce our length of stay so we can see our patients every day. We want to provide improvement to access, so that we're able to use, theory of constraints, or we're able to use, queuing theory. We're able to use, basic tools to optimize patient flow, understand demand, so that we know what kind of um, model to apply to our supply of resources. And that's not different to any other industry, right? You're always trying to figure out how to anticipate demand, and then you're trying to figure out how to optimize your resources in a way that can effectively resolve that demand and not create a big backlog, right? Not create a huge delay. So in hospitals, most of the operational work is around that, whether it's in research, whether it's in pharmacy, whether it's in the lab, whether it's an inpatient, whether it's outpatient. You're always trying to optimize that, but that's pure ops, right?
Mhm.
Of course, then there's functions that look at actually producing, like research and producing, uh, uh, clinical collateral, clinical, outcome research. But that's more about execution on other goals that were laid out in the strategy. So become the best in provision of healthcare, or become a leading center in, heart, in heart health. But those are still tactics that need to be measured, and it's operations science that allows you to translate even, task-based or project-based metrics into things that you can measure and then hold yourself accountable to. So that's why, again, in hospitals, operations is a huge area, right? Not just operational efficiency, but operations full stop.
Mhm.
Now, when I talk about strategy, I think, again, strategy kind of in hospitals kind of stops there. And obviously every hospital wants to grow and expand and create better networks with other hospitals, to talk about strategy there too.
Yeah.
But the other side of it is, to my earlier point, strategy within the healthcare system, right? And I think that's where a lot of people who are very passionate about strategy need to think about, exposing themselves in. It's like, well, how do we use all these various agencies we have across Canada? I'm just using a Canadian example. All these agencies, primary care, tertiary care, long-term care, um, and how do we use them in a way that is most effective to deliver care? And that strategy is around, again, continuity of care, is
Mhm.
making sure you're removing roadblocks to patient care. So that again goes back to operations. What can you use in terms of operational science to understand what the patient journey is right now, right? What's not
The
working for them right
roadblocks
now?
are, yeah.
And how can you then strategically align all these various agencies and resources, um, that there are many of, to give them the maximum impact?
Interesting. Okay.
So I would always say, especially when you look at people from business, and I'm an MBA myself, you're kind of trained more to think like a CEO, but you're entering an organization not as a CEO. You're entering an organization, at the ground floor, trying to make an impact. And it's really important to have a strategic lens to your thought, but I think it's even more important to understand what are the operational weak points in your environment, and how do you improve those operational weak points or risks through the use of data, through the use of operational science, data science, and there's so much more out there now in terms of um, availability of data that wasn't there before, that I think operational science and operational excellence can accelerate 5 to 6 times faster than what we're used to. What used to take me and my teams months to collect in terms of data, now because of health record systems, we can have access to an immense amount of data. So I think I would really encourage, and I know that you guys are already doing it at TPG, and we're already looking at it very heavily, is knowing how to use big data effectively.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's another branch, right? There's where that's where data science comes in, and being able to use tools to manipulate and basically use data to your advantage, because data is the new oil, as they say.
yeah. And that's a
Interesting.
great. I mean, that's pretty much. If I use the analogy from energy, before you had to spend millions and millions of dollars guessing where oil is and then digging wells. And now with fracking, with new technology, you can actually get to oil wherever it is with minimal cost. And think about data the same way. Now you have access to so much more data. Then now the challenge is what data can I actually use to package in a simple way so that executives can help make good decisions. Because right now it's a data overload issue. So now, the challenge of people in our position is, how do I give you something that's simple yet complete to be able to make good decisions? And that's where I think people, in data science and data visualization are such key players now in the industry to be able to do that, on top of people who are actually going to be able to implement and execute.
Right. So it's really good then if you are able to, have some knowledge on data science, but then also have that lens through which you understand the business. And going back to your earlier point on strategy, and you said strategy is really, choosing what not to do rather than what to do, then on a similar basis, data science is really looking at what data we don't need rather than what data we need, because of how much overload there is already, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's so much out there that you can get buried in it and then lost in it. So it just goes back to the discipline of the consultant again, is can we formulate the right kind of educated guesses or hypotheses, so that we can at least guess what kind of data we need first and make decisions from that data, rather than going for everything, trying to get every single smidge of information out there and then not know what to do with it.
Interesting. Okay, so now zooming out, I want to, go on a lighter question a little bit. I wanted to know, what book or books would you recommend to a friend or a loved one as we speak?
Like just any book.
Any book, yeah, or a book. Okay, yeah, sure. Any book, and then
Yeah.
one book that's related to um, something around healthcare or operation excellence or consulting.
Yeah, for sure. I've got a lot. So I was trying to think as you're talking which ones I would recommend right off the bat. I think for anybody who's thinking about leading change, I would almost say think about yourself as a person. Like, what are your beliefs as a person regarding change before you think that you can help change anybody or anything else. So, and I think one of the really good books that I would recommend on that is called Leadership and Self-Deception, and highly recommend that. And again, it's very focused on thinking about what is your paradigm about yourself related to change, and thinking about others. It gives you a lot of tools to reflect on what are your biases coming into problems. And I think I'm a big believer that if you work on yourself, you'll be able to work on others. So I think that's where
Very true.
that book comes in. I think that's a fantastic book. The other one actually is a book that is healthcare focused, but it's applicable anywhere. And I think it's one of those it's one of those early books that I read, and it really made an impact on me when I was looking into healthcare. However, I will say that the concepts are applicable everywhere. And this is a book by Quint Studer. Quint Studer was a CEO of a hospital for many, many years, and then he became a consultant. And he was remarkably effective and successful in implementing operational excellence into the hospitals that he went to. And he decided to write a book to kind of codify what are his key principles and what does he do. And it goes back to behaviors, goes back to what are the patterns, what's the cadence of management tasks you do during the course of a day, and
Mhm.
what's the language you use. And the book that he called that he wrote was called Hardwiring Excellence. So I really recommend that for anybody who wants to get into healthcare and reflect on what is it that it takes, what kind of leadership qualities and operational excellence mindset qualities need to be in an individual trying to make change in hospitals.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I'd really recommend those books for sure.
Okay, hardwiring excellence and leadership and deception.
Leadership and self-deception.
Self-deception. Yeah. Okay.
That would be a whole different book if it was called Leadership and Deception. That would be a different topic for a different podcast.
That is very true. Yeah, yeah, totally changed the whole meaning. Okay, sounds good. Shiraz, if there's anything else that you wanted to touch on, I'd be happy to chat about it. If not, I know you're busy too. It's been a pleasure. Like I said, I always learn something new from you every time that we speak. And I know the other day you also sent me this book on healthcare 4.0. So I'm in
Mm.
the process of kind of absorbing and taking some of the concepts in as well. So thank you. And yeah, man, it's been really good chatting with you.
Hey, you're very welcome. Anytime. Anytime, I'm happy to chat.
All right, sir. Thank you very much again, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks a lot.